Today's story is about the sculpture which is looking at you all. She's taking you in. You can look at her too, and later on you can go over and really study her, because by the time we've finished with this, you'll know so much about her and who she is and where she came from, how she actually was made and what happened to her. It's a bit like the story of the Sleeping Beauty. She's created, she's beautiful, she goes out into the world, you know the story, and then she's pricked and she lies sleeping for 100 years till she's woken by the prince and lives again. And this symbolically is a little bit like awakening. So awakening came first into the world through my father, who was at this point really starting to make a new life here. It was 1953. We'd arrived in Australia in 1940 as enemy aliens. And up until the end of the war, Dad served in the army. He and my mother had to start a new life from scratch. Their training in Europe had given them the basis of a wonderful art history and background and practical work. But here it was as if they were coming into the never-never. People didn't understand sculpture particularly, and it was really, really hard going. So they became art teachers. But by 1953, the world was becoming much more kind of positive in Melbourne, and there was a development boom, and people were beginning to look forward. The war years were becoming a memory. And my father, I think, in this sculpture, was becoming a positive person. You can sort of see she's really looking upright. She's got a positive kind of allure to her. And he asked me at one stage to sit for him. Now, he never asked me to sit for him. It was not the way he worked. He would look at me if he wanted to, a portrait and so on. He wouldn't say, oh, keep still. He'd just do it, you know. But with this particular thought in his mind, possibly referring to this sculpture here, I think I can just manage. Stefan, do you want to come and hold it for me? Yeah, thank you. Just in case my arm gives way. This was done a bit earlier, and you can perhaps turn her a little bit. Now, she's a kneeling figure, and often he would have a few minutes hold it up a little higher, according to someone at the back. Often he would take when he had a few minutes in between teaching at the weekend or early in the morning, he would run up in a few minutes a little figure in clay, some idea he had. In this instance, possibly he was thinking, I'm not sure, but certainly a kneeling figure. Did he go back to that and think, now, I want to build an over life-size kneeling figure? I can't tell you, but it could be. This is the only figure of this type in a small scale which we've found here. So we can put it down again. Thank you so much, Stefan. So he said to me, look, just kneel and put your hands like that, you know, just put your hands like that and kneel. And so I did for a little bit, and then this drawing came. So that's the first sign of this work. But to build this work is an enormous task, and Stefan will explain it to you. Nevertheless, he had in mind, there was an exhibition coming, and he wanted to build a really big work. So awakening comes into this world. Now, I think we can move on now. Stefan, I'd like to introduce Stefan. Would you mind, Stefan, stepping forward? Stefan's been a friend of mine since about the late 70s, when he first came into our lives as a student of my father. He then became my dad's assistant, so he worked really closely with him and knew all his techniques and methods, and he's absolutely the most wonderful person when it comes to knowing Karl's work and knowing sculpture. He's a sculptor in his own right, and here he's been with us since 1979 or so in the capacity of curating this museum, and an invaluable resource for the Duldig Studio. So Stefan today is going to try and give you an idea how awakening came into this world. So I'll pass you on to Stefan. And up there is our first little clue.
Yes, well, I've been looking at this thing for a long time in the old garage out here, and it was up against the wall in pieces. And I did know the story. I had heard the story before about this. This was Karl's trailer, which he used to collect his clay from Camberfield. It's a rather unique thing. It's got one wheel, and it would attach to the back of the car, and he used that to pick up his clay from Camberfield. And to make it even more interesting was he would go to Camberfield, he would actually dig the clay out of the ground himself. Look, there is a bit of clay. I'll move this out of the way. Yeah. And when I knew Karl, he would go out to Somerville. He would get clay there from a pottery which was making pipes and tiles, and he'd come back with the car boot filled up with pieces of clay like this, which is an unfired tile. But back when this was being made, he would actually go out to Camberfield. There must have been some sort of quarry or pits out there, and dig it out of the ground himself, fill up his trailer and bring it home. So it was really just a very much just a lump of earth in a way. And it was starting from like the very beginning was just a piece of dirt or a piece of clay dug out of the ground. He would break that up into his bins. Again, when I knew him, he had 2 bins out the back of his studio. He'd break the clay up into bins, cover it with water, and just let it settle and soak up the water and actually mature over time. He could work from one bin and leave the other one to mature. And he would just pick up the clay from his bin, bring it in, and start making his sculptures. As it happens, I've got a little bit of clay here. I'm not sure how much I can show you, but I had a bit of pottery training. I've done a little bit of ceramics at some other institutions, and so it was very interesting to me to see how Karl worked. Clearly, this was something he had worked out by himself. The clay, when it came out of the bins, would be sort of quite wet. There would be hard pieces in there. It was really a lot of fun actually making sort of mud pies in a way, because it was that sort of sloppy mixture. And he would just break up little bits like this. Sometimes, you know, if you've got a harder piece, you would use that as like a structural piece, but just little lumps of clay like that. And then because it was wet and sticky, it would stick together quite easily. You know. I'm not going to go too far with this, but just give some idea. And then, you know, you just go up and up, you know, and shaping it as you go. And as he would work, it would slowly dry out a little bit. It would become stronger, and that allows him to go up higher and higher and higher. Now, a big piece like this, you couldn't do that in one day. It just couldn't support itself, apart from being so much work. So he might get up sort of halfway up the thighs the first day. He might put a little bit of wet rag around the top if it was a warm weather. He wouldn't put any plastic over it. Perhaps he might drape it with just a dry cloth. And then he would come back the next day, and overnight it will have firmed up a little bit, and so he could then build up further. And all this while as well, he would be, perhaps, as he gets to that point where he can't get any further, well, he'll go back and he'll start working down at the bottom here, refining the surface. And if you look at the surfaces, you'll see there's a very distinctive little piece of clay where he just stuck it on. It's on every work he's ever done, I think. Even you go back to the very early days in Vienna, which do have more refined surfaces. If you look closely, you can still see those little touches where he just placed the clay where he wants it. It's a very sort of deliberate act. Everything is just where he wants it. Obviously, he has to ensure that the inside's smooth together, the outside's smooth together. And actually, interesting to see this one, when it was broken, you could see that at the top of the legs there, it's about 3 centimetres thick. Yeah. It's a very massive, strong construction there. As he goes up, it gets a bit thinner, I guess, but there's a lot of clay in that, and the end result, of course, is a very heavy piece. So that's very early stages. He would go through the back of it and make sure, fill up any holes, perhaps smooth extra clay on the inside and do all that sort of stuff, yeah. So by the time he'd finished that clay, as I was saying, it'd be a very, very heavy piece of artwork. The question is, how do you get it to the kiln? Obviously, it's too big to go in your normal sort of domestic kiln. It has to go in some big kiln. So in this case, he's gone to a brickworks. And the way he got it there was illustrated on the other side here. He's strapped it to a board. He's placed sort of clay, soft clay. I was having a look just a little while ago. It's obviously soft clay, which he's done as sort of pads to support the sculpture where it touches the board. I'm just thinking it would be quite frightening, just that moment of tipping it over horizontal. You know, you would be very worried that something might go wrong. But anyway, obviously it didn't go wrong. He's taken to the brickworks and they've placed it in their kiln. And it's very interesting the way they've done that. They've built up this wall around the sculpture, and that wall would have been complete in the front, and it probably would have gone all the way up to the head level, I think. And the question is, why would they do that? Well, one, I think, is perhaps to protect a little bit in case the bricks were falling. In the back left corner, you see the bricks are on quite an angle there. And the other reason might have been just protect it a little bit from the colouring or the glazing that was being done on the bricks. Because if you put in a brick kiln, you're just going to get whatever they're doing to their own bricks. And in this case, it looks like they were using a salt glaze, which is actually what it says. You throw in packets of salt into the hot kiln, and it vaporises and it coats everything. So the kiln is coated in this salt glaze, the bricks are coated in salt glaze, but the sculpture cell has been protected a bit by that wall that was built around it, except for the head and the shoulders, which if you look over there, you'll see is obviously a different colour. And I think it's actually worked out rather well, you know. Beautiful. Yes, beautiful, exactly.
Thank you so much.
That's all right.
So up here, we've got Awakening. And in the previous slide, just going back one, that is actually the advertisement in the Herald in November 1953, talking about Sculpture for Art Show. So it was in the Herald, and it had a little piece about my father creating this work, Awakening. So they're already heralding their forthcoming show into Melbourne. And I can tell you that, because I remember this was an absolutely wonderful thing for Melbourne. The whole of Melbourne turned out and walked through those beautiful paths in the Treasury Garden, which were lined with screens with paintings adhered to them, all kinds of paintings. It didn't matter, one next to the other. And Melbourne turned out and walked through these pathways under the trees. And to their credit, they had actually set aside a small part at the front near Spring Street, which was set aside for sculptures, a display for sculptures. And this is it. And we're sort of looking at it right through there. You'll see other photos in a moment. And dominating was Awakening. In fact, it was written up when the critic wrote about the sculpture show. He mentions Awakening as being one of very few sculptures that really took advantage of being properly worked for an outdoor space. So it had already created a lot of interest. Behind it are two other works by Karl. The one here, torso, you can see there with a sort of interesting base. It's quite hard probably for you to see, but you can see the top of it as it happens here. This is it. This is the sculpture, which is the second sculpture of Dad's in that particular photo. And interestingly enough, it is made exactly like Stefan has been demonstrating it. And because he was able to successfully and beautifully get this sculpture right, he knew he could do the large one. So we have that one, and behind, and the sandstone sculpture there, well, you can't see it's sandstone, but the white mother and child carving, that's in the McClellan Gallery now, and it was a carving in sandstone that he also worked on just after the war, and I can remember him working on that. So locating this a little bit more exactly, that's Spring Street. I think it's Laconia blankets up there on that sign. And here she is again with one of the old cars from the era. And at night. And my father, I wonder if I could read it without the glasses, I'll try. My father was so impressed with this that he actually wrote a letter to the editor, the Herald, and that was published, and he's written letters to the editor. This is 17th of December 1953, page 4. I would like to express my appreciation and thanks to all those responsible for the Herald Outdoor Art Show. This has given the artist an impulse and opportunity to show his work to the public in attractive surroundings. Since my arrival in Australia 13 years ago, I have felt that something was missing. The people are of excellent type, but the culture of thousands of years' tradition was absent. I think a start in this direction has now been made, and that Melbourne has entered a new era of cultural life and activity. I hope this exhibition will be held every year. Karl Duldig, Iris Road, Glen Iris. So actually I have to thank Melinda Mockridge for finding that, our research person. She found that on Trove. I wasn't aware of it until we found it just a little bit earlier when we were going through putting together the items for this exhibition. But I thought it was gorgeous. Okay, where did we go? Okay, so what happened to her after the show? She went into our back garden here, which is the sculpture garden, and Dad was very proud of her. He had her sitting on, as you can see, a sort of a stump of an old tree and so on. He was typically displaying sculptures like that, and in the background you can see sculptures which you can still see around here today. And of course, we always had dogs, so Dad's, sitting with his dog there. But there's something you'll notice about her. Does anyone see anything different about her? Come on. Oh, thank you, Margaret. Margaret noticed that the sculpture doesn't have any arms. What had happened, and I remember this, we had a little side gate along here, and this was, of course, the front lawn where you're sitting, but anyone could walk in, right? And so some children had come in, and they had knocked her off. And that was the first little accident she had, I might add, and broken the arms. But, Dad said, she looks good without arms. I'm not going to try and put them back. So she stayed like that, okay? And here he is. And you can see here, he's proud of her. He actually takes a real pride in having achieved this wonderful construction and this beautiful piece. Beauty in that's an article in the paper, and the feature photo is that photo, only the full-length photo. So it's interesting how he keeps always wanting to be a part of her existence. Then the next time she comes into an exhibited space is in our house, in our property in Mount Eliza. And this is now 1969. And together with George Mora of Tolano Galleries, my father mounted the first outdoor art exhibition by a sculptor, probably in Australia, certainly in Victoria. And this was his poster for that exhibition. So out goes bush. Very much on the bottom of that right-hand photo, right in the corner at the very back, is Awakening. And here is an enlargement of that photo, and you can see her behind my father there, displayed in the garden, and some of his other sculptures. As it happens, that wood carving there on the right is in the McClellan Gallery. The Art Goes Bush finial is just out there in the courtyard there. The sandstone sculpture is out on the terrace. The copper man, we called her when the children were little, but the fallen warrior is out as you came in through the entrance. So those things are still around. And there's Dad at Mount Eliza with Awakening, a rather gorgeous photo. So what happens next? Awakening goes on, and she's next displayed to the public in an exhibition called Karl Duldig Survey Sculpture and Graphic Works, 1922-82. That was at the time when my father turned 80, to celebrate his 80th birthday. He drew those drawings on the cover of the catalogue, which you can see on the desk there, and inside are the items in the actual exhibition. And item 23 on that catalogue happens to be Awakening, but she's changed her name. She's become Youth in that catalogue. And I was involved in mounting this exhibition, and I didn't pick up I hadn't done all the research which has now been done, and I didn't go back to the original name, so I didn't remember. I was only a little girl when it first was exhibited. I didn't remember that she was actually Awakening, so I went along when Dad said, oh, Youth, I thought, okay, Youth, we'll put that in the catalogue. So she became Youth, and there she is. But what happens at the McClellan, do you all know the McClellan Gallery, or some of you do? Who's been to the McClellan Gallery? Yes, well, it has a wonderful sculpture park. Dad's exhibition was inside the gallery, full gallery, his work, and all the grounds. So it was an extensive show. It was opened by Patrick McCackey in 1982, in December 1982. This spread, double-page spread in the centerfold of the Sun, is published in January 1983. Now, on there, she doesn't appear on those particular photos, but she's there. There she is in the McClellan Gallery on show. I'm wondering why, I think my father liked her back view, because we've already seen several photos where she's seen from the back. And here she is in the grounds of the McClellan Gallery, and then seen through the spirals of the finial to the fountain, which was one of those sculptures we saw a bit earlier on. I won't go back because we're probably running out of time if I talk too long. And there, I think that is rather charming, that photo. Now, those are the last photos we have of her intact, because like the princess in the story of the Sleeping Beauty, something happened. She didn't get pricked by a needle. She got hit by a lawnmower, which was driven by a man who was the accountant down at the McClellan, and he used to do the lawns, and he drove around and he knocked her off the pedestal. So poor Awakening was destroyed, and here she is. She lay asleep, fortunately not for 100 years, because none of us would be here, but for 40 years, 41 years, until she was awoken by a prince. I'm going to introduce you to the prince. The prince is Bill Perrin. Let's give him a clap.
So I've been working for Eva in the Duldig Studio now for well over 20 years, maybe at least 25 years. And Eva knows I always like a challenge. And, and usually I'm given a very delicate piece of terracotta and asked to transform this into a bronze, and whatever you do, don't break it. I want it back intact and no chips, etc., etc. So it was quite a different challenge to get the jigsaw puzzle of broken fragments and try and work out how to put them all back together again. So it was sort of multi-step process. All the pieces had to be meticulously cleaned with a mild detergent and then a very light pressure wash. And then I need to have a trial run just to see how all the bits went together. and then to work out how to replace the bits that weren't there. So the actual repairs were done with high strength epoxy resin, and bits had to be supported while the resin dried. So you couldn't do it all in one go. So you sort of obviously start from the bottom section, and you can't see it in the slide, but on the main section where the torso is, it's actually got aluminium armature inside for additional strength, because as Stefan explained earlier, it's actually quite thick and the pieces are quite heavy, and so at the end of the repair job you still have to move the piece and not have it come apart again, so it's got to be strong enough to support its own weight in moving. And the hardest bit to repair was that big centre bit there, because there was no bit for that, so that had to be created. So that had to be created with putting in a piece of rigid polystyrene and then modelling over that with like an epoxy resin. So that was all, had a stable surface. And then for all the detail work, the detail repair work, I found this material which is a synthetic clay called Sculpey, and you can actually kiln fire that and it hardens. But because the piece was so large, I didn't want to refire the whole sculpture, so I worked out a technique of just using a heat gun to sort of localise heat it. So you only had to heat it up to about 130 degrees centigrade and it would harden. And also, as Stefan explained earlier about the salt glazes, one colour doesn't suit all the repairs, so I had to work out a way of mix matching some of the colours. So with the colour match, it's easy to read the form of the sculpture rather than have one colour that didn't match. It would sort of stand out. It was better to have it sort of to blend in. And so once the structural work is done, then it's just a matter of working the medium like clay until you sort of cover the whole surface. And so it's another repair bit there. Again, you can see the epoxy glue for the main join, and then all the chips were filled in at a later date. All right, so the purpose of doing the repair initially were, so once she's intact, we can actually make a silicone rubber mould and start the bronze casting process. So we've got to the first stage, so hopefully one day we'll be able to go to the second stage. So this is the opening image of that. To explain the process, this is a piece we cast earlier, which was Queen of the Bush, and that sculpture is a really large Karl Duldig sculpture. It's about 2.7 metres tall, and the base is about 1100 wide, and it was made out of cement fondue modelled over like a timber. I think it was organic timber frame, and it lasted quite well, but the fondue had started to show signs of cracking, and the internal mesh that we used was showing signs of sort of oxidisation. So the brief was to cast it in bronze, and so this is the first stage of the process, is to create a silicone rubber mould, and so one half of the mould's already been made. You can see the bits of orange and the light blue colours of silicone rubber. And so now, one half's been done, and so now we're doing the second half. And you can see the clay walls are actually dividing the sections up, because it's too big to cast in one piece. So it was actually cast in 3 pieces, and even the 3 sections were quite large in terms of casting in a single piece. So once you have made the silicone rubber mould, this is a different mould, so we just jumped from one sculpture to another. The silicone rubber mould is actually a negative, and then from the mould, the negative mould, you need to create a wax positive. So the wax is actually applied with a brush bit by bit, so you pick up all the surface detail, because the purpose of creating a mould is to pick up all the detail that's in the original, and then when you do wax, you want to pick up the detail in the mould. So it's built up in layers, and then the pieces of the mould are reassembled because they're the segmented mould, and then you do what's called a swill. So you have a big bucket of wax basically, and that's sort of tipped in and sloshed around and tipped out again, and you end up with a wall thickness of about approximately 5 millimetres. So there's an example of some waxes of other sculptures that are in the process. And the next stage is what we call the runner system or sprue system. So if you see, like in the foreground, there's a foot, and you see the bottom is like a funnel, which is just a polystyrene cup dipped in wax. And then from the cup, there's tubes, they're called runners. And then off the top, there's like vents, and they're called risers. So that whole wax will be encapsulated in a refractory material, and that's part of the process called investing. And so I'll just show you this, various stages of investing. So it's done in, the first layers are actually sprayed on until you build up a wall thickness of say about 6 to 8 millimetres. And then the bulk of the mould is built up bit by bit. This is the earlier, that's one section of the Queen of the Bush. That's the lowest, the middle section actually, yeah. So you can see how large it is. And little dots coming out of it, they're actually called core pins, because when you create a hollow wax, part of the process, you have to fill the inside of the sculpture with what we call a core, and that has to be held in place, because when all the wax melts out, there's nothing to join the inside core to the outer mould, and the two can move around. So the core pins or nails actually fix the core in place. So I'll just go to this is building up. Yeah, once the initial coats of investment are put on, then you keep going with wire until you end up with a finished mould. That's the size of the mould there, so it's quite large. That's already been what we call calcined or burnt out. You can't see the kiln. The kiln's a top hat kiln, so it's been taken up, over and out of the way. And so the mould, because it's been fired, it's a bit fragile, so we wrap it with Hessian plaster and then metal straps. Because when you pour the bronze in, there's a lot of hydraulic pressure, and there's so much work has gone into getting to that point. You don't want any disasters with a mould bursting through the wall, so you go to a lot of extra care to make sure it doesn't fall apart. And then the mould's packed into a sand pit. Again, that's in case it does leak, it's contained, and the bronze can't go anywhere. And so it's all quite physical, you get to that point and there's more digging, and it's good to have young people working for you to do that, but I used to do it. And this is the bronze pour. So the video.
What temperature was bronze?
1100 degrees centigrade. That's the approximate temperature when you take it out. Yeah. And then you skim off the impurities off the top, the dross. It's about 300 kilos of bronze. So it's quite a big pour. Yeah, so all that work, and it's just depend on that short pour to get it all right. Just topping it up. Yeah, I think that was okay. So after you pour the bronze into the mould, you allow it to cool down, usually overnight, probably 24 hours, because it's actually insulated by the mould material. So all that material that you put on has to be broken off, and then the sculpture is revealed. The ceramic was made in 2 parts, and the bronze was actually cast in 2 parts. But you can see all the outer mould material, the bulk of the mould's taken off, and you can sort of see the surface layers on the front. And when that's removed, you'll see all the, hopefully, the fine detail of the casting. And then once you remove all the investment, then this is some other sculptures by another sculpture. It's a process of welding and chasing, so any imperfections are removed. Sometimes you have to weld components together, and if it's got core pins in, core pins are removed, pull the nails out, and that'll leave a hole on the wall of the sculpture, and that has to be welded and filled. But basically all your work with the chasing should be, you know, invisible, because you don't want to, you want to look at the sculpture as it was when you got it. You don't want to see evidence of the work in the foundry. And that's probably almost finished. Echo, yeah, again, yeah. And so usually after you get to that stage, you do process of patinas, but I learned on a very early age that you don't put patinas on Karl's pieces. They're left natural and raw. So as much as possible, they're as cast. So no sandblasting, you know, just light water blasting. And then back to Queen of the Bush. So you can see in the foreground is a bronze, and the original is the cement fondue is at the back. So yeah, so that was about 300 kilos finished, I think, from memory. Yeah. So, but to pour that in one go, you probably need. It's just too big for the facilities that we have. So, and again, you know, when you weld them together, you want those joints to be invisible. You don't want to look at the sculpture and say, "Oh yeah, I can see a weld through there. It's been joined." So, and that's the finished piece installed. Hawthorn, yeah, beautiful. The beautiful sunlight catching. Yeah. I think that was the last slide. So,
I particularly want to thank Stefan and Bill for helping me with this, because it was just lovely of them to do that for me. And I hope you now understand her and understand where she's going next. Yeah, very important. She's next going to be cast in bronze. And then she can be displayed outdoors. The way she is now, she's way too fragile, and she can't really be moved around much at all. Otherwise, she'll go back into her sleeping state. But if she's in bronze, she will be forever. So was it worth coming for? Oh, yeah. Good.